I looked at my phone screen. My picture was circled in red. People online were voting like it was a game. They wrote cruel things. Each word hurt my chest. I am Agnes Reed. I am 68 years old. My daughter-in-law, Lila, had asked her followers to pick who they would remove from our family photo. I sat in my little car outside a house is still owned. My hands held the deed. The same house my late husband Martin and I had bought years ago. The house was in a small town called Willow Bend. I drove there now because I needed to see the place with my own eyes. It all began with Ben, my 42-year-old son. He had just been promoted at his accounting firm in the city. Lila said we should celebrate. She wanted a family photo for her social media. She arranged us in the yard like a director. Ben and the children stood in the middle. Mia and Luke, their teenagers, looked at ease. Lila snapped many photos. She told them how to stand and how to smile. When she looked at me, she looked annoyed. She never used my old pet name anymore. She called me Agnes like I was a stranger. She positioned me at the edge. She smiled, but not kindly. 3 days later, my neighbor, Nora, came to my door. Her face was shocked. "Agnes, come quick," she said. She handed me her phone. The family photo was on Lila's page. My face was circled with a thick red ring. The caption read, "If you could erase one person from this picture, who would it be?" Then Lila added, "You know who I mean." Comments poured in. Strangers wrote, "Get rid of the old woman. Why is she even in the photo? Time for a retirement home." Lila replied to many comments with laughing faces. My heart sank. I felt small and foolish. I felt betrayed. My memory took me back to when we bought the house. Ben had married Lila soon after college. They had no steady jobs. Martin and I had a small nest egg from his mother's estate. Ben said, "We can't buy a house now." I remember Martin and me talking late at night. We decided to help. We bought the house in Willow Bend and put it in my name. We thought this would help our sons start a life. We asked them to live there. At first, they paid a small amount for taxes and repairs. Later, after Martin passed away, I stopped asking for money. I told Ben, "Family does not need to pay me." I wanted them to have a fair start. I never told others that I owned the house. Years went by. Lila began telling people that Ben had bought the house. She liked the story better that way. It made her look strong. She started showing her life on social media. She showed spa days and fancy dinners. I noticed she had nice handbags, expensive shoes, and gifts I could not afford. I did not mind at first. I liked to see my son happy. Then, after Martin died, I moved to a smaller apartment. I wanted them to have room in the house. I had trusted them. I believed they loved me, but the social media post felt like a hidden knife. My neighbor called, and the laughter online turned into a painful echo in my mind. Lila had made me a joke. People I did not know were making fun of me. Even some I thought were friends added cruel lines. It was not only the post. Lila seemed to be leading a life I did not know how to afford. I asked Ben about money before. He said they were fine. "I managed the bills," he said. I took him at his word. The next day, I called Ben. When he answered, his voice sounded thin. He said, "It was only a joke, Mom. You know social media. It gets out of hand." I told him, "I own the house. My name is on the deed." He paused. "About the house," he said. "You bought it for us. You gave it to us." I answered, "No, I own it. I bought it in my name." He seemed confused. He said, "We live here. We have invested time and money." I said, "You have been my guests. I let you live here." I was kind. He asked, "What are you threatening?" I had not thought of threats then. I only wanted my dignity back. That night, I sat and cried a little. I had not felt so small since Martin's funeral. A few days later, I walked into my house. I used my own key. Lila and Ben froze. The house felt different. The colors on the walls were new. The furniture looked unfamiliar. Ben said, "You cannot just come here." I said, "This is my house. I have a deed. "You cannot use the house as a weapon," she said. My chest tightened. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I found a lawyer named Henry Shaw. He had helped with Martin's will long ago. He was a calm man with gray hair and a steady voice. He told me the law. "Agnes, legally you are the owner, but this will be messy. They have lived there a long time. They may claim they have rights. They can ask for money for improvements." When Henry said this, I thought of the new kitchen and the deck they had built. "Could they ask for compensation?" Henry said. "Maybe, but there is little legal standing if they never had a lease and never paid taxes." As Henry spoke, I felt a strange sense of power. Power I had lost after Martin died. I thought about the humiliation online. I thought about the money and the gifts Leila showed. I wondered how she could afford such a life. Henry found a detail in old files. "Agnes," he said, "there is a trust for Ben. It was set up when Martin's mother died." My heart raced. "How much?" I asked. He said, "About $400,000 as of last month." I felt dizzy. Martin had set up a fund for our son. He had expected Ben to use it in a wise way. I had been handling that trust as the administrator. I had never told Ben about it, because it was to be opened when he turned 45, or if I died. Ben was not 45 yet. Suddenly, my plan to protect my son felt different. I spent nights reading bank statements and old papers. My hands shook when I saw small charges on my card. $50 here, $30 there. At first, I thought it was errors. Then I realized many charges came from the same device. The receipts showed purchases Leila would like. So I asked Nora to help me. She had known Leila since she arrived in Willow Bend. Nora said, "Agnes, I always wondered how she could buy so many things." We dug more and found evidence that someone had used my credit card without telling me. Each discovery made my anger grow. I had hoped for peace in old age. Instead, I felt lied to and used. One late night, I found a call recording app entry. It was a file from a few months ago. My heart sank. Someone had been recording my calls. Someone had been watching me too carefully. That very thought made my skin crawl. I thought of Leila's post again. The public shame was not the only wound. The planning and lies ran deeper. The next morning, I made a choice. I was not young and brash. I was tired, but I had a right to the life Martin and I built. I would not yield to being a joke any longer. I called my lawyer the next morning. Henry told me to come to his office. He had found more things. He said, "Agnes, there are signs of fraud," he explained slowly. "Your card shows charges that were not yours. There are new credit applications. Someone used your name to open lines of credit." My hand trembled. I had been helping when I could. I had not imagined such betrayal. "Who did this?" I asked. Henry said, "We think Leda had access to your details." It felt like a slap. I had let Leda into my life. I had trusted her. Henry arranged a meeting with a forensic accountant named Laura Finch. Laura was precise. She poured tea while we talked. "Mrs. Reed," she said, "we found 6 new accounts that match your name and social security. These were opened with Leda's phone number and email." I listened. My hands folded in my lap. She added, "We also found loans taken against your house." My heart stopped. "Loans? They used your house as collateral," Laura said. 3 loans in 1 year. I closed my eyes. I could not breathe for a moment. Laura showed me pages of documents. There were loan documents with my signature. The signatures looked like mine, but there were odd loops in the G's. My stomach turned. She said, "Someone forged your signature." I felt sick. "How much?" I asked. $230,000 in loans," Laura said. The room seemed to tilt. The money went through a company they set up. It paid for a condo in another state. I felt heat rush to my face. While I lived small, they had a second home. Henry sat back. "We need to move carefully," he said. "These are federal crimes." He named them: identity theft, wire fraud, elder abuse. The words sounded heavy. I thought of my son as a boy. He had given me dandelions once and called them treasure. The man across from me had dark eyes now. He acted like a stranger. Henry asked, "Do you want to press charges?" Tears came to my eyes. I thought of Ben and the grandchildren. Laura said, "If we press charges, Lila may go to prison. Ben may too." I asked, "Can we make them fix this without prison?" Henry said, "We can offer them a way out if they make full restitution." He showed me an option. It felt risky. It felt right. That night I slept little. I thought about the many small things I had done for Ben and for his family. I thought about the meals, the babysitting, the rides to piano class. I thought about the way Lila placed herself at the center of every story. My phone buzzed. It was Ben. He wanted to talk. I answered and told him to come to Henry's office. He arrived the next morning with Lila at his side. She wore a new dress. She smiled with practiced ease. They thought they were meeting for a family talk. I felt calm. I felt a new clarity. Henry spread the papers on the table. My voice did not shake when I said, "You forged my signature on 3 loan papers. You opened accounts in my name. You used my card. You used my house without my permission." Ben stared. Lila tried to talk. She said, "This is a mistake." She looked like a woman used to smooth words. Laura placed another paper down. It was a printed list of bank transfers. "You used the money to buy property in Clearwater," Laura said. Lila's smile faded. "That's not true," she said. Her voice wavered. Ben looked at me and pleaded, "Mom, we can fix this. Don't go to the police." He sounded small. I thought of the boy who had learned to fix a mistake when he broke a window. I thought of how the small voice of right and wrong can leave a man's chest. Henry asked quietly, "Do you want restitution or do you want charges?" I looked at Ben. I looked at Lila. I thought about the grandchildren. I remembered Martin's hands, rough and kind. I said, "I want them to own what they did. I want the money back. I want them to leave the house and never use it to borrow more. And I want no more games. If they refuse, press charges." They left the office pale and silent. For a week, the phone did not ring. Then Laura called. "Agnes, we found something else," she said. "They kept records." The tone in her voice made me sit up. "They planned this," she explained. "Lila documented your spending, your trips to the clinic, your social posts. She kept notes about how to make you look unstable." I felt sick. She had been reading my life like a book, Laura added. "We have messages where she speaks of making you appear confused." I remembered the post. It had looked like a joke. Now it looked like a tool. My breath came short. One afternoon, my grandson, Luke, came to see me. He was 15 and tall for his age. His hair hung over his forehead. He handed me a small folder. "Grandma, I found this in my mom's office," he said softly. Inside were notes and emails. "She wrote about pushing you out," he said. "She said she wanted you gone, so the house was hers." I felt a new kind of hurt. The boy's eyes were red. He had seen the truth. He had chosen me. He had risked anger at home to bring me hope. That evening, Henry called Ben. He told him we knew everything. Ben went pale. He had looked like a man who suddenly carried the weather of shame. He called and asked to meet. He met the following morning with Laura. There too. I wanted to see their faces when they learned the full scope. A folder lay on the desk. He had bank statements and copies of loan papers and credit card records. There were emails and pictures. The evidence formed a pattern. They had created a fake company on paper. They had used the house as collateral. They had opened accounts with my name. I watched Lila's face change color. He tried one last defense. "You were protecting the family," she said. "He thought you were going to make poor choices. He thought you were losing it. He forged broke." Ben looked down. "He forged desk. He forged too. He forged desk. He forged too. He forged staust left." He folded staust. He folded staust. He folded stanens. He folded stanens. He folded stanens. He wanted them to pay back everything. He wanted them to sign papers, removing claims to the house. He wanted all fraudulent loans reversed. He wanted them to turn over the condo. He wanted them to cooperate with banks and federal investigators if needed. He gave them until 5 in the afternoon to decide. He folded staust. He folded stanens. He folded stanens. He folded stanens. He foraged to. He folded stanens. 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 He folded steined. I thought of the empty rooms after Martin died. I thought of my small life. I wanted a simple thing now. Fairness. At 4:30 the phone rang. It was Ben. His voice was broken. "We accept," he said. "We will do what you say." I felt something like sorrow and relief. They would leave. The house would be mine again. But what would I do with the pieces of my son that had been used and bent? 3 weeks later I stood in the kitchen of the house I had bought so long ago. The floorboards creaked the same way they had when Martin walked across them. Sun came in the windows, like it always had. Ben and Leela had moved all their things out. They had taken the curtains and some paintings. The condo in Clearwater had been sold. The loans were repaid. The trust was fixed. Money was returned to accounts. Documents were signed to release any claim they had. It felt strange to walk through rooms that once held the laughter of my family and now felt quiet. Emma, my granddaughter, came by with a box of her things. She was 17 and taller than I remembered. She had Ben's eyes. She hugged me tight. "How are you?" she asked. I felt younger in that moment. "I'm fine, dear," I said. "Are you and Luke okay?" She nodded. "We are. It's different, but it's real." She smiled small. I made tea. We talked about small things. She promised to come to dinner. "Your pot roast," she said. "Please make it." I agreed. I felt a gentle warmth in my chest. The neighbors had been kind. Some had seen the posts. Some had heard gossip. Others had known all along that the house belonged to me. People left small notes at my door. A letter came from Nora with a pie. "For you, Agnes," she wrote in shaky ink. "For standing your ground." I felt grateful. I felt like I had been read again as a person. Henry called and told me the authorities would investigate. He said, "You made the right choice." Laura said, "You avoided prison for those who should be punished, but the record will show what happened." I was relieved that the truth would be on paper. Still, at night I thought about what was lost. I had lost a son, in a way. A son who had been my boy, and then had chosen a different path. I thought about the math of it. Money can be a mirror. It shows the parts of us we want to hide. When you need to borrow against a parent's life, you also borrow their trust. You buy a house on top of loyalty and assume it will hold. Sometimes it cracks. Ben called less at first. He lived in a small rented place now. I went to his new house one afternoon with soup. He answered the door. He looked older. He had lost weight. His eyes were softer. He said, "I'm sorry." He sounded like a boy again. I said, "I do not want you to go to prison, Ben." He began to cry. I sat on the floor and held him. He said, "Lila told me this was only temporary." I was ashamed to go to my friends and say I had nowhere. He said, "I forgot what you taught me." "I'm sorry." I remember showing him how to hold a tool once when he was 8. He had always fixed things with careful hands. He told me, "I'll make it right." Weeks turned into months. The house settled back into our life. I opened the garden again. I planted roses by the porch. I put a small bench under the maple. I wanted small things that did not break. Emma and Luke came on weekends. We ate pot roast and talked about school. They were children who liked honesty. Luke, with a folder of papers he had taken from his mother, said once, "Grandma, I am glad you didn't give up." I smiled and held his hand. He was brave. There were hard mornings. I would wake up and feel a hollow place where trust had been. I went to community groups. I helped in a small library. I made friends with Mrs. Hammond, who had a laugh like bells. She asked me to tell the story of how I came to buy the house. I told it plainly. People listened. I realized many had seen similar things. The elderly sometimes fade from the center of the story. They become characters in other people's dramas. My story mattered to others because it reminded them that age does not strip a person of rights. It reminded them that dignity matters. On a quiet Sunday evening, I posted a photo of Martin and me on the porch. The caption said, "Sometimes you have to fight for what matters most." Neighbors wrote kind words. Emma wrote, "Love you, Grandma. Thanks for teaching me what right means." The words warmed me. I thought of the boy who had once broken the window and learned to fix it. I thought of the lesson I had taught him about honesty. I thought about how people can change. Ben was coming to see me more. He was volunteering at the library. He looked tired but present. Lila's name rarely came up. She had moved away and started a new life. I did not wish her harm. I only wished that she might one day feel the weight of what she had done and learn. My life returned to a peaceful rhythm. I walked at dawn. I made soup. I read books and wrote letters to old friends. The house felt whole again. Sometimes I sat on the porch and watched the late light. I thought about justice and mercy. I thought about the strength it takes to stand up for yourself. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. I had not wanted a war with my family. I had wanted the truth. In the end, it felt better than any victory. A young woman from the neighborhood asked me once, "Aunt Agnes, would you do it again?" I smiled. "Yes," I said. "I would do it again. Not for punishment, but for honesty. For my grandchildren. For the quiet life we all deserve." She nodded and hugged me. I felt the sun warm my face. I thought about the future. I was older, yes, but not invisible. I had a house that had weathered many storms. I had my own small life to tend. I had my family in a different way. The truth had come back home. After the storm, life moved in slow, honest ways. I took small steps back into the town I had helped shape with Martin. I visited the small bakery on Main Street. Mrs. Paddill knew my order. She gave me a scone and a knowing look. "You did right," she said softly. I looked out the window and saw the maple tree by the library. It kept its green, even when the wind came. I liked that about it. It reminded me that some things lasted. Ben tried to rebuild trust. He came by more often. He took the bus now because his car was sold to pay back a loan. He would sit at my kitchen table and read papers or fix an old radio. When he fixed things, his hands moved like they used when he was small. He remembered how to be careful. One evening he cooked dinner. It was simple. Pasta with tomatoes and basil from my small garden. He hummed while he stirred. I watched him and thought about how people can change when they are left to face their choices. Leela went away for a while. She said she needed space. The rumor was she had moved to another city to start fresh. I did not follow the gossip. I let her go. I felt no joy in her leaving. I felt only the slow calm that comes after a wave has passed. Sometimes she called, but rarely. Her voice on the phone was distant and guarded. Once she asked if I would speak to her to explain what she had done. I said no. I needed time to breathe. The grandchildren were a bright part of the new routine. Emma helped in my small garden. She learned to plant bulbs for spring. She liked to climb the old apple tree and sit on the branch with her legs swinging like a child who had not yet grown weary. Luke helped me with the yard and with small files of paper. He would sit and look through letters and old photos. He liked to hear stories about Martin. He asked me if he could bring friends by sometimes. I said yes. It felt like life would find room for small joys. One morning, I got a letter from the bank. It was a formal notice that the loans had been cleared and that the title to the house was free and clear. I held the paper in my hand and felt the paper tremble. The house had always been mine by law. Now the paper matched the truth. I walked through each room slowly. I touched the kitchen counter where Emma had once made a cake. I sat by the window where Martin liked to read. The house felt quieter, but gentler. Neighbors came around with casseroles and small notes. Some apologized for not seeing the signs. Some told me they had known but feared saying anything. I understood those fears. People can feel trapped by the shape of others' lives. I did not hold a grudge against all of them. I held only a firm sense that truth mattered. At a small block party that summer, a neighbor named Carl came up and shook my hand. He said, "You gave us a lesson. Thank you." I felt the heat in my chest soften. The town did not need a big speech. It needed small, steady acts of kindness. At the library, where Ben started volunteering, I found a shelf with books on old gardening tricks. I borrowed a book about pruning roses. The book smelled like dust and years. I read one line that made me laugh. "A garden will forgive shoddy hands if you return to it every year." I liked that thought. It felt true for people too. I felt forgiven by my garden. It welcomed me back. I planted roses along the back fence and a small herb box near the kitchen door. The plants did not demand apologies. They only wanted time, water, and sun. One afternoon, Emma and Luke came with a friend. The friend, Mara, had a quiet smile and asked about Martin. She said, "My grandfather had a garden like this." They sat on the back step and talked. I made lemonade. I felt the children's voices mix with birds. The sound was steady and honest. It reminded me that life kept going, that children would carry lessons forward without the weight adults sometimes carry. Ben and I started to sort through old papers again. We found notes Martin had written about his plans for small improvements to the house. He had wanted to fix the stoop and plant a row of lavender. I found a small folded page with his neat hand. "For Agnes, so the porch will smell right." I held it and felt him close. In the evenings, Ben would ask me to tell stories. I told him about the day we painted the kitchen and how Martin spilled paint on his shoes. He would laugh, surprised at how small things could be a memory. Even with healing, there were nights I lay awake thinking about how easy it had been for some people to believe a social post more than a person. I thought of how social media can make a private wound public. I thought of how my name got circled like a mark on a target. The thought made me steady my breath. I learned to step back from the internet. When it buzzed, I used my phone for small things now, like photos of roses and messages from Emma about school. One rainy Saturday, I went to an elder support group at the community center. A few people I knew came. We shared small things about being alone and being cared for. An old man named Joseph spoke of regret and of forgiveness. He told us in a quiet voice, "Forgiveness does not let you forget. It frees you." The room was full of nods. I thought of what I had chosen with Henry and Laura. I had chosen truth and a chance for restitution. I had chosen not to make my grandchildren carry the weight of prison time if I could avoid it. That had been a hard coat to wear, but it fit my shoulders like something made to size. When autumn came, the maple dropped red leaves like coins. I would rake them with the grandchildren into a large pile and let them jump. They laughed and cried at once. The laughter always made me breathe deeper. It felt like the world had room for both pain and play. Ben and I would sit on the porch with a blanket and share quiet cups of tea. He would tell me small stories about the new work he was trying to find. He had applied for a job at a small firm that handled non-profit accounts. He wanted to give back. I told him I believed in him. He said, "You always told me to do right, even when it is hard." I smiled. In December, when the days were short and light thin, I invited Emma and Luke for a small dinner. We had pie. We lit a candle. Ben came too. He looked tired but present. We talked about small things, school projects, a coat Emma wanted, Luke's plans for a model airplane. No talk of court or loans. For a few hours we let the family be a gentle thing again. I thought of Martin and felt him near in the hush. The house kept its warmth and took the cold weather well. One night before bed, I sat by the window with a mug. The moon was thin and sharp as a coin. I watched the town I had lived in for decades. I felt the steady hum of lights and life. It was not perfect. Some scars remained. My son still had to earn himself back. But we had begun the work. I felt patience shape my days. The house was mine, but it was also ours in a different way now, lighter and truer. I slept with the window, cracked a little, breathing the cool air, thinking of small green things growing under the soil. The next morning I rose to light and the scent of coffee. Life moved forward, one honest step at a time. Spring came the next year, like a new song. The tulips pushed from the ground, and a breeze carried a smell of wet earth. I walked the yard daily. I found spots where the kids had played. I found a tooth cleaned and saved in a small jar. The little things that stay were substitutes for the big losses. I kept them like tokens, small proofs that life had not stopped for me. Ben had begun a class at the community college. He wanted to study small business management. He said the work would help him build a life that did not borrow from others. He seemed steady, in a way he had not been before. He learned to cook better, and once surprised the grandchildren with pancakes shaped like stars. Emma's face lit up, and she took a picture and wrote, "Star pancakes with Dad." She sent it to me, and I laughed. The small snack warmed more than the stomach. It warmed the trust between us. The town library had a book sale each spring. I donated a box of books. Martin and I had read over the years. People came in with cloth bags. Old friends found the books and held them. A young woman, Jenna, thanked me for giving books to the children's section. "My little boy loved stories like these," she said. I felt a small joy that came from sharing things that mattered. One afternoon, a man named Mr. Collins from the bank called. He wanted to confirm the clearing of liens on the property. He spoke carefully and politely. I listened. He said the record would show the loans were removed and the mortgages satisfied. He asked if I wanted an updated title printed. I asked him to send it. When it arrived, I placed the paper in a small frame and put it in the study. It was not to boast. It was to say that truth was on paper alongside memories in the rooms. I wrote letters to Martin's old friends. I wrote to the cousins we had not seen in years. I told them small things about the garden and about the way the light falls in the kitchen at 6 in the evening. They wrote back with stories of their own. The exchange of small notes felt like a network of quiet support. It was not loud, but it was real. At the community center, I gave a small talk about identity theft. Henry and Laura had asked me to speak because the police recommended public talks about elder fraud. I sat at a table with a cup of tea and read my notes. I told simple stories about how small charges can add up and how social media can make private hurts public. People asked questions. Some had been through similar pain. One woman told me her son had used her name to open a small line of credit. Another man said he had found false charges on his account. We talked until the chairs creaked and the sun left the room. Emma began to write small poems. She left one on the kitchen table for me. It was about an old house and a woman who planted roses. I pretended not to cry. I kept the poem in my pocket. It felt like the grandchildren had made a small bridge back to me. Luke often came to help me with small projects. He learned to use a hammer and to fix a loose step. He liked working with his hands. He told me he wanted to be an engineer one day. I felt hope in those words. Ben found a small job at a nonprofit that helped elderly people with tax forms and health paperwork. It was a modest position, but honest. He learned to do things for others in a new way. He seemed calmer on the spring came the next year, like a new song. The tulips pushed from the ground, and a breeze carried a smell of wet earth. I walked the yard daily. I found spots where the kids had played. I found a tooth cleaned and saved in a small jar. The little things that stay were substitutes for the big losses. I kept them like tokens, small proofs that life had not stopped for me. Ben had begun a class at the community college. He wanted to study small business management. He said the work would help him build a life that did not borrow from others. He seemed steady, in a way he had not been before. He learned to cook better, and once surprised the grandchildren with pancakes shaped like stars. Emma's face lit up, and she took a picture and wrote, "Star pancakes with Dad." She sent it to me, and I laughed. The small snack warmed more than the stomach. It warmed the trust between us. The town library had a book sale each spring. I donated a box of books Martin and I had read over the years. People came in with cloth bags. Old friends found the books and held them. A young woman, Jenna, thanked me for giving books to the children's section. My little boy loved stories like these, she said. I felt a small joy that came from sharing things that mattered. One afternoon, a man named Mr. Collins from the bank called. He wanted to confirm the clearing of liens on the property. He spoke carefully and politely. I listened. He said the record would show the loans were removed and the mortgages satisfied. He asked if I wanted an updated title printed. I asked him to send it. When it arrived, I placed the paper in a small frame and put it in the study. It was not to boast. It was to say that truth was on paper alongside memories in the rooms. I wrote letters to Martin's old friends. I wrote to the cousins we had not seen in years. I told them small things about the garden and about the way the light falls in the kitchen at 6 in the evening. They wrote back with stories of their own. The exchange of small notes felt like a network of quiet support. It was not loud, but it was real. At the community center, I gave a small talk about identity theft. Henry and Laura had asked me to speak because the police recommended public talks about elder fraud. I sat at a table with a cup of tea and read my notes. I told simple stories about how small charges can add up and how social media can make private hurts public. People asked questions. Some had been through similar pain. One woman told me her son had used her name to open a small line of credit. Another man said he had found false charges on his account. We talked until the chairs creaked and the son left the room. Emma began to write small poems. She left one on the kitchen table for me. It was about an old house and a woman who planted roses. I pretended not to cry. I kept the poem in my pocket. It felt like the grandchildren had made a small bridge back to me. Luke often came to help me with small projects. He learned to use a hammer and to fix a loose step. He liked working with his hands. Winter returned with a thin frost. The porch steps iced over, and I swept them carefully each morning. I did not want anyone to slip. The house needed small care and patience. People would stop and ask if I was warm enough and if I needed anything. My neighbor Nora left a basket of blankets by the door. I felt comfort in the small things. The town's rhythm changed with the season. It gave room for reflection. Ben had been offered stable work at the nonprofit. It was an honest wage, and it came with a small health plan. He was not earning a fortune, but he had started saving a little. I showed him how to make a simple budget and how to put a small amount aside. He now paid me a modest rent for his small flat. It was a sign. The rent went into a jar we called New Start. He liked that idea. He would add an extra coin when he could. The jars became a symbol of rebuilding. Emma performed in the school play. She played a minor part, but she stood on stage and remembered lines. I sat in the small theater and watched her. She read from a script and laughed at a funny line. After the show, she ran to me and hugged me tight. She told me about lines she liked and the friends she had made. I felt glad to be a witness to these small moments. At the community center, I ran a small workshop on saving receipts and watching bank statements. I used Laura's list and Henry's advice to explain simple steps. Many people came. Some had been victims of small frauds. Others were there because they wanted to learn how to help family elders. A man came up afterwards and thanked me. He said, "My mother would have been so glad you held this." He had kind eyes. The work felt useful. One rainy night, Ben and I found a box with old postcards from Martin. He wrote small notes to me when he traveled for work. He wrote about the sea and how the light bent against the water. He wrote, "Agnes, plant the lavender where the sun hits at 4. I smoothed the cards with my hand. The writing made the house feel like a place stitched together by patience and small thought. I told Ben about Martin's way of noticing tiny things. He listened and smiled. He said, "He must have loved you well." I told him he did. Lila's name appeared once in a local paper when her new city opened a small shop. I read the announcement and noticed the brief note. It did not move me much. I felt only a quiet sense that life would go on for many people in many ways. I hoped she would find a better path. I hoped she would learn without more pain. My hope was not for her sake alone. My hope was so the grandchildren could grow without anger heavy in their pockets. The grandchildren learned the taste of chores. Luke cut the hedges and learned to stack wood. Emma learned to mend small tears in clothes and to sew on buttons. She made a small patch for a shirt that used faded blue fabric and stitched it by hand. She was careful. She liked doing things that last. I taught them how to fold letters and how to make lists. They learned small skills their parents had not taught them before. It felt like passing a torch in quiet light. On a clear Saturday, we took a small drive to the river. The water moved steady and calm. We fed bread to ducks and watched their smooth heads flash in sun. Ben tossed a small stick, and the grandchildren ran to fetch it. The moment was simple and bright. On the drive back, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, and Luke hummed a song. I felt the house waiting for us when we returned. The house kept a light for small returns. Sometimes I thought of the legal battle and the many papers. I kept a file in the desk for the case documents. When I opened it, I felt a press of memory and a steady satisfaction that justice had been chosen over revenge. I had chosen restitution and truth. I had let the law be the stern teacher rather than me being a judge and jailer. The choice had cost me quiet nights and some family closeness. It had also returned a house and a life that did not smell of lies. Friends came to visit now and then. We shared tea and small slices of cake. They asked how I managed to stay so calm. I told them I had good people, Henry and Laura, and that I had learned to tend a garden and to keep a small book of things I loved. I told them I found peace in small acts. They smiled and nodded, as if the recipe was simple. To them, it might look simple. To me, it was a practice I had chosen over months of worry. In the attic, I found a small tin box with old snapshots. There were pictures of Martin with paint on his shoes, and of our first car with a dent that made us laugh. I found a small picture of Ben at 7, with a bandage on his forehead from a fall. He had a grin like an apology in that photo. I framed it and put it on the mantel. Whenever Ben entered the room, he saw the boy in the picture, and sometimes he would say, "I remember that day." We would both laugh and then fall into a softer talk. As spring edged forward again, we looked at the future as a long garden that needed constant work. I planned to plant more perennials that returned each year. I planned to teach the grandchildren about small repairs and about how to read a kitchen measuring cup. These were small things, but they made a life stable. I thought of justice as a tool that set boundaries. I thought of mercy as a light that warmed the hands that had done harm. One evening, I wrote a short note to the grandchildren and left it on the kitchen table. It read simply, "Grow honest things, water them, keep them safe." Emma found it and put it in her wallet. Luke read it and tucked it into his school book. The note was small. The words were simple. The meaning felt large. Years do not hurry in Willow Bend. They pass with small rhythms of bloom and fall. I learned to measure days by small tasks. I measured winter by how many jars of soup I had prepared. I measured summer by the yield of tomatoes from the raised bed. The house kept time by small habits and by the sound of laughter around the table. Sometimes the past would come to visit in dreams, but mornings always brought light and chores that needed doing. Ben had settled into a more settled life. He proposed a small idea for a community tax help day where volunteers could help elders fill forms. He worked with the nonprofit and with other volunteers to set up the event at the center. It was a simple way to give back. He spoke at the meeting with a gentle manner, explaining forms and offering patient help. People came and left relieved. The small acts made a real difference. He had turned the wound into a tool to help others avoid similar pain. Emma graduated high school with a small ceremony. I sat in the old wooden chair with other families and watched her walk across the stage. She wore a cap with a small token of a star on the tassel, a star like the pancakes he had made months ago. After the ceremony, she hugged me and said, Thank you. I felt proud, but mostly I felt like a witness to something beautiful forming. She wanted to study literature and hoped to teach someday. She loved small words that told big things. Luke started building a model airplane and showed it to his grandfatherly neighbor, Mr. Howard, who taught him how to sand and paint the wings. They worked together sometimes with Ben watching. The community knit together in small ways that made life sturdy. I bought Luke a small tool set for his birthday. He pretended to be surprised, but hugged me with an old true love. He had been brave when he handed me the folder with documents that had started this whole story. He had taken a part and made it gentle. Sometimes people asked me if I regretted my choice to avoid prison for those who had done wrong. I answered honestly, I do not regret asking for restitution and for truth. I said, I regret that the trust was broken. I regret that a boy I loved made bad choices. The town listened. A woman named Claire told me once, you gave them a chance to learn as well as be punished. I thought perhaps that was true. People needed both lessons and limits. The years softened the sharp edges of our memory. There were quiet joys. A neighbor named Rosa would leave a small jar of peaches at the doorstep in August. I learned to make jam the way her mother had taught her. The jam found a place on the breakfast table and in small gifts to friends. I sent a jar to Henry with a note that said, for steady counsel. He wrote back, for brave heart. I read the note and felt grateful. One afternoon I found a postcard from a local college inviting the community to a lecture on elder rights. I decided to attend. The speaker was a woman who worked on elder law. She spoke about rights and dignity and about how communities could protect elders from financial abuse. She asked the audience to be watchful and kind. I felt the speech like a small bell. I thought of Laura's precise work and Henry's steady hand. At the end, she opened the floor for questions. Ben stood and spoke. He told the room, my mother helped me find a better way. The audience paused and then applauded softly. I felt a warmth swallow the room. In the quiet months, I sometimes found myself writing letters to Martin. It felt silly yet honest. I would tell him about Emma's school plays and Luke's model airplane. I would tell him how the roses did in spring. I folded each letter and put it into a small box in the study. The letters were private and they were my way of giving thanks. One summer, a young reporter came from a city paper. She wanted to tell a story about small towns and old houses. I said yes. She asked few sharp questions about the case. I answered simply and plainly. She noted how the town rallied and how the grandchildren had helped. A short piece, printed later. It was not about revenge or shame. It was about repair. The piece used a line I had said at the elder meeting. Dignity is not negotiable. I liked that line and kept the paper. As the years moved, sometimes Ben would bring a new friend to dinner. We would sit and eat and talk about small things. The house felt full of new voices. The grandchildren grew. Emma applied to a college in another state and visited campuses. She called from the road and told me about trees and old libraries she had seen. I could hear the wonder in her voice. Luke studied hard and built small machines from old car parts. He wrote letters to companies asking about apprenticeships. One cold night I walked to the porch and saw a thin line of stars. The world looked large and patient. I thought of choices and how they have a way of stacking like stones. Some choices break things, others build bridges. I tended my small stack of stones by doing small acts, planting seeds, helping a neighbor, writing a note to someone who had been kind. The grandchildren left handprints on the kitchen wall near the stove. I measured their height with pencil marks that stretched over years. Sometimes I would stand and trace the marks with my finger. They showed how time had passed and how small people become capable adults. The marks were a slow miracle. People in Willow Bend sometimes asked me to speak to a small group at the town hall about community values. I agreed when I could. I told them about being careful with small kindness and about the need to protect elders. I told them not to let social posts define people. The talks were small seeds. I did not seek glory. I only wanted to help others not fall into the traps we had faced. One spring, Emma returned with a book she had helped edit for a small press. She had interned for a month and had found the work she loved. She set the book on my table and said, "This is for you." I opened it and found a short page she had written about the smell of old houses and the way they hold stories. I read it and felt something that felt like peace. The house had always held stories, and now it held new ones too. On a late afternoon, the town held a small festival. They invited people to speak about their lives. Ben did not speak this time. Instead, he ran a small booth, showing how to file out of forms correctly. He smiled when people came and thanked him. Emma read a poem she had written about gardens and grandparents. I sat in the small crowd and watched. The town hummed with small life. I kept living by small habits. I kept a neat jar of change, a box of letters, a row of planted lavender. I kept a rule to mend what I could and to forgive where I could safely do so. Life had taught me that truth and mercy might stand side by side, and that was enough for most days. The house kept its light, and the maple kept its leaves. We kept going. Time began to feel like a gentle river. The house knew the passage of years by the creak of boards and the soft wear of the carpet. I would wake and hear the kettle sing, and the town begin to stir. I had come to a place where the past no longer shouted, but sometimes whispered. The whispers held lessons rather than pain. I cared for the little things because they carried the weight of larger truths. Ben had become steady in his work. He found pride in helping elders file taxes and in teaching others how to avoid scams. Once he was asked to speak to a group about his mistakes and what he had learned. He stood in front of a small gathering and said plainly, "I was selfish. I thought quick gain could replace slow work." He told them about the pain he caused and how it had cost him more than money. People listened. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply told the truth. The act of truth-telling seemed to wash some weight away. Emma moved away for college. The house felt hollow in a new way for a time. But she called on weekends. She would tell me about a class or a book that had changed her view. She sent letters with small pressed flowers inside. The small tokens made the house feel loved from far away. Luke visited more often now, and sometimes he would bring a small machine he had made. He had a talent for fixing old radios and small engines. He would hand me a small polished bolt and say, "For good luck, Grandma." I kept the bolt in a jar. The town went on with its quiet rhythms. The library added a new shelf for local history, and I donated a small stack of older letters and photographs. The archivist was kind and careful. She stored things in a small folder where future readers might find them. I liked the idea of a record that did not only hold scandal, but also held the many ordinary acts of a long life. At times I still saw Lila in the distance. A letter arrived from an address in another state. It was brief. She wrote a short apology and said she was taking therapy and trying to learn. She wrote that she wished the grandchildren well and that she hoped they would find a steady path. I read the letter twice. The words did not remove the years of pain, but they offered the small thing of acknowledgement. I did not reply. I kept the letter in a drawer and later burned it with small thanks for truth. The grandchildren grew into small adults. They came and went with friends and jobs. Emma sent a postcard from a trip to a coastal town where she had seen cliffs like knives and light that broke on the sea. Luke started an apprenticeship at a local shop. He learned to weld and to read plans. He would come to the house sometimes with small things he had made for me, a shelf, a birdhouse. I kept them on the porch and watched birds find them. One night I sat with Ben, and we listened to old jazz records. The music filled the room like soft light. He told me he had started a small project to help people check accounts. He had created a simple checklist, and volunteers would come to help in the library. He asked me if I would talk to the group sometimes. I said yes. It felt good to be part of a small solution. Neighbors still waved and sometimes brought things. Rosa brought figs in late summer, and Nora sent over soup when I had a cold. The town had regained a simple kindness. It was not perfect, but it was honest. People had learned to watch for one another a bit more closely. I liked the way small habits create safer places. On a soft afternoon, I walked to the river again. The water moved slow and steady. A pair of swans glided by like two white boats. I thought of Martin and of the choices that lay behind me. I thought of the many small acts that had built my life, making tea, mending clothes, planting seeds. The river kept going and pulled leaves along with it. I felt a gentle gratitude that out of pain had come new care. One winter a small plaque was placed at the community center, honoring volunteers who had helped elders. The plaque had names including mine and Ben's. We attended quietly. The plaque had simple words about service and care. We posed for a small photo. Someone joked about how we would frame it by the door. I laughed and felt the warmth of a life that had been mended by steady acts. Sometimes I would sit at the table and read old letters from Martin. He had written about small things. "The best days are the ones with tea and a good laugh," he once wrote. I would fold the letter and place it in its tin box. Memories would come and then pass. I did not chase them. I kept them gentle. On a late evening, Emma called. She had been offered a small teaching job in a town 2 hours away. She asked if she could have a few of our old books for her classroom. I promised a box. She laughed and said, "You always gave me stories, Grandma." I said, "You always gave me hope." We both felt the truth of it. As I grew older, the house and I moved together like two old friends. The porch light stayed on for small returns. The garden needed less work but gave bright surprises each year. The grandchildren left small mementos on the mantel. The house held traces of many lives held in its rooms. I would sit and watch the sunset and think about justice, mercy, and the long work of building a good life. I had learned that standing up for yourself did not always mean breaking others. It could mean making clear what is true. It could mean choosing a path that lets the guilty make restitution and the harmed regain dignity. It could mean planting roses and teaching children how to fix a step. In Willow Bend lies a quiet proof. Small acts add up to a life that can be rebuilt. I watched the town lights come on and felt a calm I had not felt for many years. The house was mine again. The truth had returned. The family changed, repaired and imperfect, kept moving forward with honest work and small kindness. I sat with my cup of tea and watched the stars come out, one by one. I smiled and thought, sometimes peace is a quiet thing you choose each morning.